It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. Welcome. If you are a guest, you are in a place of honor this morning, whether in person or online. If you're here in person, we'd love to meet you. So catch up with us at the back of the auditorium in the foyer there when we're done here this morning. A special Sunday in my estimation. I want to let you guys know a couple of things that are coming up on the horizon real quick before we get started this morning. Number one is this week, 255 complete blessing boxes are going out into the community that will feed 255 families over the week of Christmas. I want to give you guys a hand this morning for what God is doing through you in the community and 255 families receiving that blessing. It was well worth it for me to be packed in and unable to move for one Sunday on that front. Also, next Sunday, we will have a special family program during our class time here in the auditorium. It's going to be Christmas Eve. We do this every week, but it'll be a little special next week, and I hear there are some other special things that'll be happening Sunday as well. Might be some delicious hot cocoa out there. Some of the ladies are taking it upon themselves to make sure that it's a special happy Sunday. So we look forward to you being with us next week. It's a perfect time to bring a family member on this special occasion or a friend or invite someone back who hasn't been with us for a while. It'll be a great time. I want to start this morning with a story that is going to require me to be a little bit transparent. It's fitting because we've been talking about telling stories, and I want to tell you the story of how my short-lived football career started. It's been a while since we talked about football out of this pulpit, so I think I've built up a little bit of equity. We can tell this story. There is a lesson to it. Dad, if you're ever watching this, I want you to know I remember this moment. I don't know if you do, but I signed up to play midget league football, or Pop Warner football. What do they call that in Texas? I don't know, probably some more intense name. Pop Warner football. That started at age 9 where I was in West Virginia, and I got assigned to this team called the Little Rams. And when I was 9, I was in the 3rd grade, and the hottest thing going at that time was Coach Prime before he was a coach. And he was just high stepping down sidelines and stiff arming, and that is what every kid wanted to be on the playground, and when they put on the pads for the first time to play football. So there I was, and in West Virginia, they have this offense in the high school system, or they did until probably the mid-2000s, called the wing T. Anyone familiar? Everybody ran the wing T, and you had a halfback and a fullback and a wingback. And they were like, this kid is pretty fast, and he's pretty shifty, so we're going to put him on the wing. And that means you run a lot of outside runs. Sometimes you run counters, and I was excited. I was a kid that had great vision, mediocre acceleration, and good top-end speed. That's an interesting combination for a running back. I later would transition to play wide receiver. That was much better. But I remember in practice on the first day of contact, and they called my number in the huddle, and I got super excited. Oh yeah, I've been dusting people in races for 2 weeks, and now it's time to show them. I can't wait to dance in the end zone. Sat there in the wing, and they called it. And I came, and I took the handoff, perfect form, and that buck sweep left was not going to be open, and that vision kicked in. But I saw right down the middle, almost like these pew rows right here, daylight. You remember Gail Sayers back in the day said, give me 6 inches and daylight, and it's a touchdown. I thought, I got daylight and 6 inches. So I cut, and I go up the middle, and I got daylight, and then as soon as it was daylight, it was night-night. Because I saw the end zone, but I didn't see the linebacker coming down on me. And he planted me. And my coach said, we're going to call you Corn, Stenson, because you got planted. Corny coaches. The funny part is I didn't hear that till later because I don't even remember what happened. It really was night-night. The lights went out. And I woke up on my back with the teammates around me looking down, and my coach with some smelling salts, back when they still woke you up with that ammonia, and they'd shake that little thing and bring it out and stick it right up under your face mask. And between the mucus that was in my face mask and the ammonia, I woke up and I thought I had died. And I'll just let you know, that went very differently than I had it planned in my mind. That was not what I expected when I saw a crease of daylight. And so, in the first game, when they inexplicably called my number again, and and they called buck sweep left. I had to go back to a conversation that I had with my dad after practice that day. Because he brought me home and he said, Marcus, how you feeling? I don't want to play football anymore, Dad. I don't want to do it anymore. And he said, well, Marcus, if you get through this season and you don't like football anymore, you don't have to play anymore. But you're going to go back to practice tomorrow and you're going to play on Saturday, because once you quit, it becomes a habit. And if you quit this, it's going to set a standard for you quitting things when they get uncomfortable in your life. And then he said this, I'll never forget it. Stensons always finish what they started. And so I went back out there the next week, and I lined up, and they called buck sweep left. And my legs were shaking. You remember like when you really got scared playing sports for the first time? Maybe it was the first live pitch in baseball, and you don't trust that kid slinging it. Or you know full well this is full contact now. This is not Deion Sanders, it's not NFL primetime. You are in it. And I remember taking that sweep, and I remember seeing that crease, and it was wide open, but I did something different this time. I went all the way around the outside, and I luckily made it around the corner, and I took off. And I'm not going to run in here today because I can't adequately represent how I was running that day. But if you ever saw Forrest Gump run, I wasn't running because I saw daylight. I wasn't running because I wanted to score. I was running for my life. That's the most effective way to run the football, okay, if you don't know. And so I took off streaking down the sideline. And at about halfway through this 70-yard run, I thought, oh my God, I did it. I'm going to score. I'm going to make it. This is exactly what Dad was talking about. And I just start yelling, and my buddy Sean is with me, and he's yelling, and he's a lead block caravan, little bowling ball that he was at the time. I scored. And that was my first touchdown ever in my football career. And it got called back for holding. Who calls holding in midget league? Who? Really? Really? But the point remains. It was a good principle that my dad taught me when I first started playing football, that you finish what you started. And life is replete and filled with situations where you had anticipated a thing going a certain way, and it turns out, when all is said and done, right in the middle or right at the beginning or right at the end, you have this realization, I pictured this going very differently. And then the disillusionment sets in, and then the discouragement sets in, and then the choice you are faced with is, do I finish what I started, or do I run the other way? You've been here, even if it wasn't in the midst of youth sports. You've been here in life. You've ended up in a relationship that you didn't think you were supposed to be in. You sat down with a hairdresser that you trusted, and then they showed you the mirror afterwards, and you thought, oh no, we're going to have to buzz this whole thing down. We're going to have to start from scratch. You've trusted someone to cook for you, and you've had to choke it down. That food didn't come out like they planned or like you planned either. Maybe you woke up one day after recently being married and you thought, this is not what I thought it was. That is not a personal commentary on my life right now. I love you. It is better than I thought it was. That's what's officially on record this morning. But you might be wondering where this is going, and this is super relevant for us personally in our lives, and it's super relevant for us as a congregation this morning as we approach the end of 2023. And our scripture this morning came out of a book of Ezra. It's kind of a book that we don't end up in very often. We read of the situation in the Old Testament books of Ezra and Haggai and Nehemiah that don't get a lot of attention but are super relevant and pertinent to where we are as a congregation together. Now, the thing that they're most famous for, these three books, is the rebuilding of the wall that we find in the book of Nehemiah and the rebuilding of the temple, which we find in Ezra, and Haggai speaks to this too. Now, here's a little background context so you know where they're coming from. This is happening at a time that's referred to as the Second Temple time period, and it stretches all the way from the time we're reading about until 70 AD, when Rome would finally destroy this temple, finally after a brutal siege. But these books record the transition period of Israel coming out of Babylonian captivity and all the challenges they faced while they were trying to get things back the way they were before. So here's the background of really what happened. In 538, like we just read, the king Cyrus releases Jewish exiles to go home and rebuild the temple. We read about this in the first chapter of Ezra, and about 50,000 people leave the Babylonian exile and they come back home. 2 years later, the prophet Haggai speaks from the Lord and tells them to start rebuilding the temple finally, which is what they were sent to do, and all kinds of roadblocks and obstacles stop them from doing it. And in Ezra chapter 3, verses 8, they finally finished the foundation. And that brings us to the problem that I think we have in common with them today, even this many years into the future. So the scene is this. You have this people who've returned from displacement and captivity in Babylon. And they actually get to finish reconstructing the foundation of the temple for God in Jerusalem. And they get back to the house of God and they assemble together for the first time since everything had been taken away from them before. And if you have ever put yourself or lived through a situation where you feel like you lost everything and had to start over, and then you get to go back, what a moment that would have been. What an occasion. They've been in captivity for some 70 years, and every single one of the Jews had been longing and crying and praying and wishing for this moment. And so in Ezra, we find and expect the children of Israel, after so many great acts of a good God, to bring them back in a state that you would think nothing could dampen their spirits. But in Ezra chapter 3, we read about what happens on that occasion. They've finished the foundation of the temple, and here's what it says happens. It says, they sang responsively in Ezra chapter 3, verse 11. And then it says this, all the people shouted with a great shout when they praised the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. But many of the priests and Levites and heads of fathers' houses, old men who had seen the first house, wept with a loud voice when they saw the foundation of this house being laid, though many shouted aloud for joy. So the people could not distinguish the sound of the joyful shout and the sound of the people's weeping, for the people shouted with a great shout, and the sound was heard far away. And so they finally lay the foundation of this temple, signifying that they are back. God has freed them. God has given them favor. And as we break down this scene, I think over the last few years, we may have been in a similar place. Let me explain what I'm talking about. You see, we find here that there are people who are overcome with joy and praise, and they rejoiced. I'm sure many of you a few years ago, as you'll see in a few minutes, rejoiced. But there's something else that's going on here as well. The text says that there were also people who looked at this new foundation and they looked at this new beginning and they were overcome with sorrow because they actually remember the first temple before it was torn down. And now by comparison, they feel as though this new iteration was worthless in their eyes. And they're so upset by their comparison and how they expected things to be that their wailing was so great that it made the sounds of joy indistinguishable for the people that heard it, both of their number and those that were just around them, even a great distance away. Have you ever been in a situation or a party where everyone's excited and then there's one voice of dissent who's the buzzkill and destroys the vibe for the entire room? And now all of a sudden it's not a celebration anymore because there's one person that wants to complain. I want you to multiply that times 50,000 at the dedication of the foundation of this new temple. Did you catch that? People were so upset about things not going the way that they expected or being what they expected or going how they planned that it outweighed all of the praise that was going up in this moment. How sad to lose this moment for these well-meaning Jews, Levites, priests, elders. They returned to a familiar place and they could not reconcile in their hearts that they just saw this building project going a little differently. And I wonder how it affected the people who were rejoicing to see the people they had heard great stories of God's glory from to be so dejected and hysterical in this moment. It had to be confusing and it had to be disheartening. And what about the people who were now in the land who were just watching from a distance? They're not even Jews. They're people that had never been exposed to God and his people before. They don't know about the promises. They never saw the original temple. They'd never been to church before. The very people that Israel was supposed to be a light to. I wonder what the effect would have been for them that this complaint and this hysteria rose up on what should have been a joyous occasion. Here's why this matters. I think we're in a similar situation right now as a congregation. And here's what I mean. Back in the fall of 2019, long before my time here at Leander, and maybe before yours too, the leadership in this congregation together decided to move forward with a building project of their own, a capital campaign, the Vision 2020 campaign. How many of you are familiar with the Vision 2020 campaign? Some are not. Here's what happened. The campaign was to launch this congregation into God's next chapter for Leander. And the goals for the campaign were ambitious. And the target was set to raise about $2.5 million over a 3-year period. That $2.5 million was designated to, firstly, give a generous portion to outreach and missions. 20% of that raise was going to go to the work God was doing in surrounding communities, but also to build a new classroom wing, offices, and playground. Also, the plan was to update existing facilities to include a repair and remodel of this auditorium that we're sitting in right now, a renovation of the brick house on the campus over to my right and to your left, a renovation of the kitchen and the pantry, renovations to restrooms, other classrooms, the foyer and entryway there, and the exterior of the building. Also in that was to create access points that were up to security codes, so a replacing of all of the external facing doors. There were also the miscellaneous church projects we always laugh about, resurfacing parking lots and fixing roofs, but those are real things that have to happen. That was allotted for under here too. And so that building campaign kicked off in the spring of 2020. And the initial round of pledges came to approximately $800,000, which was short of the initial goal by a pretty sizable margin. But at the same time, it was a really good turnout for the congregation that we are and our size. Now, we all know and remember 2020 was an interesting year, wasn't it? 2020 was a year we could have never seen coming. And for many of us, we found ourselves just trying to make sense of surviving a time that was perilous physically, economically, and mentally. And I don't know about you guys, it was a challenge for me on those fronts. And I also decided I was going to drive from West Virginia to Texas with 2 tranquilized cats in the back of the car to move in the middle of a global pandemic. I don't know about your decision making, but mine is questionable. I'm glad that I'm here. So this pandemic hit right at the beginning of the pledge period for this new campaign. And as you can imagine, that's something that can threaten to derail an entire project. During that pandemic, the cost of doing business and the cost of doing life in general grew to the word that I am tired of hearing, so we're going to ban it from use in this congregation from this point forward. Unprecedented levels. I'm so tired of hearing people, it's unprecedented, it's unprecedented. How many unprecedenteds have to happen before it's now precedented? This is just the way that things are. But in that period of time, lumber increased by 400%, plumbing 175%, commodities and resources across the board went by. Entire businesses and sectors shut down and shuttered their doors, never to be seen from again. Kids weeping everywhere because Chuck E. Cheese is closed and done, and parents rejoicing. Businesses went out. The availability for materials and contractors, as stretched as they were with their supply channels and now being able to pick and choose what jobs they wanted to do and did want to do, changed everything almost overnight. And so with this storm of circumstances beyond our control and the drastic increase projected cost and the shortfall of the amount pledged, the shepherds made adjustments to the vision and the campaign back in 2021. The shepherds, if you remember, encouraged the body to pause their pledge giving through the height of this pandemic to prioritize family and taking care of themselves. Wise. The planned expansions of classrooms were put on the back burner for the time being, and the emphasis got shifted to building the new playground, which you see outside right now. It's very nice and awesome. Remodeling of the brick house, the restroom remodel, an auditorium renovation, and a secure children's ministry area, and the exterior update to the campus. So additional maintenance areas of emphasis were replacing the doors and parking lot maintenance, some of the stuff that you guys have seen done over the last couple years already. Bringing things into ADA compliance, fixing the ramp, the things that are really not really big for people to see and notice, but that are happening nonetheless. But the last time we talked about this campaign was 2 years ago. It's been a while. Fast forward to today. Obviously, almost in 2024, much has changed. And this is not just a message about the building campaign, because I think this experience that we have had has lessons for us personally and as a community. Guys, this pandemic has been over for years. It's no longer an excuse for today. Lots of things happened that were unfortunate. You guys lost a minister, and then you guys welcomed Maggie and I into the family. And lost in all of this newness is the noble, worthwhile project with a foundation but no finish, much like the temple in Jerusalem. For those of you who were here to see it begin, your long overdue direct, clear communication on the status of this campaign and the project. And for so many of you, thankfully, new to our family here in the last 2 years, you might be sitting there without any eyebrows right now thinking, what in the world? This might be the first time you even heard about this. So let's level with each other here. I'm going to share what has happened in the gap and what we believe God is doing now. Okay? Here's what's happened. Despite the pause, approximately 770,000 of the pledged 800,000 was received. That's over 96%, and that's an incredible percentage, frankly, something to be celebrated. It demonstrates this church's commitment to service and loving our neighbors near and far, which is in line with our vision and our values. Over 127,000 of that has been given to outreach and missions to date, and the auditorium repair, not remodel, has been completed, as evidenced by the fact that there isn't an awesome swimming pool just kind of sitting there in the middle for any baptisms that want to happen later. All the exterior doors have been replaced and are brand new. Of course, the parking lot's been fixed. The new playground is finished and is awesome. The restrooms have been renovated and remodeled, and the hallway ramp has been fixed. And so, despite tremendous upheaval of that COVID season, much has still been accomplished. And even so, it's easy to look at the original goal and the foundation of what has been done and feel a little bit of cognitive dissonance. I want to say that that's a fair emotion for you to feel right now. It's fair to admit that this didn't go how we planned at all, and it hasn't yet lived up to the high aspirations and hopes that we all had in mind for the project. So it's natural to feel a little bit like the children of Israel with grandiose memories and lofty expectations, standing at the foundation of a temple rebuild that looked like something else, something that looks like less than they had planned and hoped. And moreover, it's been so long, and there's been so much confusion, and there wasn't enough money, and we haven't heard any news. When is it going to happen? Is it even going to happen? And will it even be as good as I hoped and as good as I remembered? It's just really strange to me that we find ourselves in a distant future, yet in a similar situation to the children of Israel upon their return to Jerusalem. We, like them, began an ambitious project in an effort to glorify God and serve our community. And then forces outside of our control, economic, political, physical, stalled multiple of those projects. For Israel, it was the temple and the city wall, and for us, this campaign. And then they came back after a period of captivity in which things looked very different in the world around them now, and we came back from what we call a quarantine, and really, things have never looked the same since, have they? Forever, people and churches across the country prayed, can we get back to normal? Can we get back to normal? Before we were forced to reconcile the reality that this is the new normal, there's no getting back, this is where we are today. Now, make no mistake, I'm not conflating the church with Israel, nor our capital campaign with the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. But I am saying that the forces and principles at play are too similar for us to miss the lesson. Because in a parallel account of what we have read in Ezra, the prophet Haggai records God's response to what happens when this disillusionment with the campaign occurs. In Haggai chapter 2, verses 8 and 9, or I'll start in verse 3. Let's give a little more context. It says this, God says, who was left among you who saw this house in its former glory? How do you see it now? Is it as nothing in your eyes? Yet now be strong, O Zerubbabel, declares the Lord. Be strong, O Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest. Be strong, all you people of the land, declares the Lord. Work, for I am with you, declares the Lord of hosts. According to the covenant that I made with you when you came out of Egypt, my spirit remains in your midst. Fear not. For thus says the Lord of hosts, yet once more in a little while I will shake the heavens and the earth and the sea and the dry land, and I shall make all nations so that the treasures of all nations come in, and I will fill this house with glory, says the Lord of hosts. The silver is mine, and the gold is mine, declares the Lord of hosts. The latter glory of this house shall be greater than the former, says the Lord of hosts. And in this place I will give peace, declares the Lord of hosts. Pay attention to what God is saying to his children. God says to those of us who had plans, who had hopes, who invested themselves in this project, that we are to be strong and that he is with us and that everything belongs to him. that all nations will come into the house of the Lord, and the latter glory will be greater than the former. And he promises to give us peace. God's answer is to take heart. He knows that we're always going to be tempted to remember what we thought the plan was, what we thought it would be like, and be tempted to be disappointed by what it is. First, let's recognize that God does indeed acknowledge that things aren't the same. He already knows what he is doing and building here in Leander. He already knows what challenges we have faced. He already knows what challenges we will face. He already knows what we're tempted to feel, and he knows the things that we are all worried about. But what if God didn't even want things to go as we had planned for things to go? God says that the latter is going to be greater than the former. He's not trying to accomplish what the children of Israel set out to accomplish. He's not trying to get back to what was. He, as he speaks to them in the prophet Isaiah, is trying to do a new thing. He says we must remember that he is with us, however it looks, whoever is here, whatever new things are now part of the plan, whatever original things are no longer part of the plan that didn't work out. The important thing is that he is with us. Is our faith in what we had planned to do, or is our faith in him? He says we should not weep for those things so that we don't miss the beauty of what he is doing now. What's curious about this and a little bit distant from our case is that the memories and human nature don't seem to recall just how broken things were at the temple originally. The children of Israel who are now weeping for the glory of the former things don't seem to remember how broken things were that ended with them being taken into captivity anyway. Things were not amazing. Despite the beauty and the gilded nature of the first temple, the presence of God had actually left, and it was empty and useless worship that God detested. And they wanted to bring that back. But what they wanted to bring back wasn't what God wanted to bring back. He wanted more for his children. So I ask you, does God want our plans, or does God simply want us? So we're left with a dilemma that we must overcome. That jarring sense that emerges when an experience doesn't play out how we hoped or planned. God had one resounding message for his children in those days, and I believe it's the same message he has for us today. It's not all too different from the lesson that my dad instilled in me at a very young age. God's commendation to his children was, finish what you started. The children of Israel had begun a project and encountered obstacles and opposition they never anticipated. Throughout Nehemiah, Ezra, and Haggai, they repeatedly saw their rebuilding project derailed. There were issues with resources, internal strife and rebellions. There were political circumstances and edicts that came on them. There was even violent and foreign domestic opposition. And perhaps the most threatening, the disillusionment of their own plans and hopes for the project. So much stood in the way for them has appeared at a time for our campaign here too. And God's answer was to tell them to finish what they started, by letting him finish the job. So here's where we're going now, family. With much prayer and consideration, and God doing some things like only God can, frankly. The shepherds and leadership here are likewise committed to finishing what we started with this Vision 2020 campaign. Here is how. Here's what you can expect to see imminently, and here's how you can be a part of what God is doing to finish the job. Due to the changes in costs that I mentioned before and the funds available, we have actually re-engaged multiple contractors to reimagine the original plans for this campaign and the elements that are outstanding to it today. Those conversations are actually ongoing now, and you can expect much more regular communication on how they progress from here out. Our initial pledges did leave us far short of the resources needed to complete all of those projects in the original vision, but as God always does, he has shown up and shown off in ways that only he can. We have received a generous donation of $1 million toward the continuing efforts in this project. This is obviously a game changer, and there's about $1.3 million now in funding that are being deployed presently to accomplish the envisioned projects beginning in Q1 of 2024. We are still, though, can we just be excited about that for a second? That's exciting. That's God, man. is not a sad message. That's God. Okay. We're still a way short of the funds necessary to complete everything we set forth, but here's what you can count on, knowing that we are working already. The auditorium is being completely renovated and remodeled to include a new backdrop, a new stage. Yes, the burnt orange carpet is going away. I know we love it. Hook 'em horns, and you can hook this orange right up to a cart and carry it out of here. The walls, doors, windows, and classroom furniture and amenities for all the children's classes are being redone and modernized, including kid-friendly designs and decor. That is starting now. Get with Daryl. He's on top of this project right now, and he's already got some of the new furniture in and in storage. If you want to see some of the new things they're doing for kids ministry here at Leander and investing in our youth, get with him and he will fill you in. The foyer and the entryway is going to be refreshed, including paint and flooring and new furniture and fixtures, with a goal to modernize it to create kind of a continuity of aesthetic and create a space where everyone can feel comfortable to fellowship. I've never been in a church where people just kind of hang out in the foyer as much as we do here, so we're going to invest in that and make that a space that people really enjoy being even more than they do. It's going to be modernized. It's going to look very new. You can also expect a complete makeover of the exterior of the building. Go ahead and throw up that original render. This is from the original plan, but it'll look something very much like this, but updated. It's going to look brand new in here, and it's going to look brand new out there as well. Plans are being drafted now for a new youth and family center that will include multi-purpose activity space, class and meeting areas for youth and classes. Those plans are a work in progress due to all the change that has happened, so you can expect details on those as they snap into focus. I want to let you know we're being very creative with what we're doing there, and I personally can't wait to share more of what we're doing soon. And I think I'm allowed to announce now that we're also rebuilding our entire online presence with a brand new website that'll be built from the ground up. That is already in development, and you can expect to see that hopefully in the next couple of months. There are a few surprises along with that and caveats that I don't think we're quite ready to share yet, but I would say keep your phones close to you and know that we are working hard to create a digital space that will make opportunities to interact with us as a community and let it not just be a place that is an information dump about us, so to speak. In short, all of those things are happening and in progress as we speak. You can insert the office gif of Steve Carell running around saying, "It's happening. Oh my gosh, it's happening." That's how it should feel around here. But it will not happen without us. There is still a gap in the funding. We'll need to finish the job, but we are committed to proceeding in a way that we will feel God would have us proceed and to let him handle it. That was his advice to the children of Israel, and that's his advice for us today. So as such, we want to let you know that we've decided to extend the Vision Capital Campaign for a final bonus year in 2024. And we're doing that for two reasons. We're doing that in order to give those of you who have been here from the beginning the chance to consider giving again to this effort. It could be a one-time Giving Sunday gift. It could be a year-end gift. It could be a recurring donation through 2024. However, you feel led by God to participate. We also thought it was necessary to extend the campaign for this final stretch in order to give the many new members who weren't even here back in 2019 or 2020 the chance to sow into this vision as well. Now, I want to stress that we're not taking another round of pledges. We're not going to be pursuing anyone. We're not soliciting. We're not making any asks. We're just going to say, prayerfully consider giving what God leads you to give towards the effort to finish what God has started. That's going to be between you and God. We trust that he will provide what he determines for this goal. With that being said, we will officially close the campaign at the end of 2024. It's going to be done, and we're going to give the results to God and what he wants for the future of this church. Does that sound like a deal, everybody? We're going to be communicating regularly as these things progress and develop. No more void of information. Where there's a lack of information and communication, negativity always fills it, and there doesn't need to be negativity surrounding what God is doing here. And one thing is curious to me about this account of what God was doing with the children of Israel. Due to all the obstacles and roadblocks, it actually took 5 years to rebuild the temple in the instance that we were looking at. And I look at the inception of this effort back in 2019 and the reality that we're going to close it in 2024. It just feels like that span of 5 years are communicating to us that things are actually progressing exactly as God intends them to. And I want to encourage you, we have a lot to be excited about and to be looking forward to. God is so good. Nobody could have envisioned what was going to happen back in 2020. I certainly never envisioned moving to Texas, but look at what God has done. Look at what he is doing. It doesn't look like we originally planned. It does not. It didn't go the way we thought it would go, but it is still going God's way. And God says the latter glory will be greater than the former glory. This is a great time to move forward, not just as a congregation, but I want to make a personal invitation too, because there's nothing more common than churches who have been obsessing over reasons, like we talked about the last few weeks. It seems that their lives never actually left the pandemic season. If you talk to anyone about how church is going on the street today, you'll probably get one of a couple responses. One response you'll get is, it's going okay. We're blessed, but we lost a lot of people during COVID, and it just hasn't been the same. Or you'll hear, well, we put a lot of things down during COVID, and for some reason, we just never picked them up again. It seems like there's a lot of rationalizing, a lot of reasoning, a lot of bargaining going on for so many church communities. Family, look, it is 2024. We have not been in this pandemic for a long time, and it is time to own it. We are not where we are because of COVID. We are where we are because of who we are. And it has been long overdue for us as a people, and I'm talking about the church community collectively, to stop letting the pandemic be an excuse for why we aren't who we ought to be and headed where we ought to be heading. So here at Leander, catch yourself, keep yourself accountable. This is one of those look at your neighbor and say, we're not going to use COVID as an excuse for what's happening here anymore. I want you to check them. We're not going to use it as a reason why we haven't finished what we started. After all, it is God who has begun a good work in us, and I am convinced that he is faithful and he will finish it. So let's finish it together and give glory to God all along the way. This is a pattern that's played out in Scripture again and again and again, because when Jesus actually came to save, to become king, it looked nothing like the people who were waiting on it, the people who were calling for it and praying for it. It looked nothing like they expected. But his latter glory is greater than the former glory. And he also says that if anyone is in Christ, you're a new creation. The old is gone and the new has come. And your latter glory is greater than the former glory. But if you haven't let him begin a new work in you, I think today's an excellent day to do that too. Maybe you're using COVID as an excuse as well. I got to get my life back together before I get with God. Finish what you started by letting God finish what he started in you too. I hope this has been encouraging for everyone. We have a lot to be thankful for and excited about. We serve a God who is good and who always finishes the job. It is an honor to be with him in it. And if we can help you in any way, please come as we stand and sing.